There are for sure quite a few ways in which we could go about creating the animation for our doors in this exercise, but what we are going to take a look at here is how we can actually use a Lerp node in conjunction with the timeline node that we have already set up in order to create the motion that we want for our automatic door. To begin with then, we are going to want to have access to some of our previous work, and so from the Variables section of the My Blueprint tab, let's drag out the door_L_start variable, and then choose the Get option when asked. Because our variable will be set via the construction script that is storing the left door's current location, when we choose the Get option here, what we are doing is getting the start location of the door stored in the float value, which needs to be the starting point of our animation for obvious reasons. With the door starting point in place, we will next want to build the logic that will create the end point. Let's drag from the variable output, and then type the minus sign into the search field, and choose the float minus float option that appears. Inside the B float value, we can type 90 and press enter or return. As we are creating the animation for the door by blending between two location values, we need to create that second value as an offset, and because we are creating the logic for the left door first of all, we need a value that is lower than the starting location so that the door actually moves in the right direction. And what we are doing here then is telling this node to use the start location and then take 90 away from it in order to give us our end point. This may take some trial and error to figure out when working on our own projects, depending on the scale of the scene with which we are working. Time now to put our two locations to use then, and create the logic for using them both inside the animation. Again then, dragging from the variable output, let's type the word Lerp into the search field, then click to add a node of the same name from the float section. A Lerp node essentially lets us blend between two variables using a third value as an alpha, as it were. Lerp nodes come in a number of variants, but as our locations are stored as float values, we will want to use a float Lerp node. Now, we have automatically added our door's start location as the start value due to the fact that we dragged out from our first variable when creating it. With the Lerp node in place, what we want to do now is set up our second input. And so, let's pipe the output of our float minus float node into the B input of the Lerp node, essentially telling the Lerp node what we want to blend to when its alpha input reaches 1. The node will start by using the door's stored location float value, which has been placed inside input A. And then, as the alpha value increases, it will shift towards input B, which, as noted, uses that same stored starting location, but with a minus 90 offset. Finally, as we want to blend between the two values, let's, on our timeline node, click and drag from the open float value output, and pipe it into the alpha input of the float Lerp node. You will remember that we set our timeline to take 2 seconds, going from a value of 0 to 1. And so, whilst the timeline is playing from 0 to 1, our float Lerp node here will be blending from input A over to input B, thereby creating the animation that we want. In this exercise then, we have looked at putting our timeline's float node to good use by getting it to act as the alpha for the Lerp or linear interpolation node, meaning we have now set up all of the logic for the animation of our first door. Currently though, that information or logic isn't being fed through to the static mesh in the level,